Hi, and welcome to Sgt Dorsey Speaks here on IGTV. I'm a retired 20-year veteran sergeant, and I'm going to share some information with you regarding goings on in Northern California, specifically on the Vallejo Police Department. As an LAPD insider, someone who spent 20 years in patrol, in uniform, I'm able to explain police policy, police training, police tactics, and in some cases decipher police code talk, and I'll be doing some of that for you today. Be sure to comment down below in the comment section with regards to the story that I'm going to be sharing with you. There was a Bay Area investigation done by NBC which links several Vallejo police officers in a majority of the uses of force on that department. And so I want to, before I talk about the investigation that was done, I want to first give you a little background on just who the Vallejo Police Department is. And in order to do that, I'm going to share with you just a very brief video of a shooting incident earlier this year that involved a young man by the name of Willie McCoy. For those of you who don't know, Willie McCoy had passed out behind the wheel of his vehicle in a drive-thru Taco Bell. Employees at Taco Bell could not get his attention. They couldn't wake him up. They were banging on the window, honking horns. He was clogging up the line, right? So they called 911. Police responded, and then it went all bad. For those family members of Willie McCoy who I am in contact with, who I am collaborating with, who I am advocating for, I'm going to play the video. It'll be about 1 minute long, and so out of respect to the family, if you don't want to be triggered by what you're about to see, I'm going to ask you to just step away for about a minute.
Gun. Call it out. What? There's a gun in his lap. See it? Right here. He's moving. He's not up yet.
So you had an opportunity to see the video, and if you want to see more of it in its entirety, you can do that online. His name is Willie McCoy, and this was a deadly police shooting that occurred in Vallejo, California. Now let me tell you a little bit about that shooting. That was 6 officers who fired 55 shots in 3.5 seconds. Why? Well, because they could. Because police chiefs and city managers in this case have a propensity to circle the wagons, minimize and mitigate unnecessary use of force, and there was certainly nothing reasonable about the force that was used in that incident. They never even took a moment to consider the fact that maybe this black man behind the wheel of his car unconscious might be having a medical emergency. Rather, they fired 55 shots in 3.5 seconds. The tactics that the officers used in this shooting, in my opinion, was over the top, unnecessary. There was no exigent circumstance. The officers spent about 10-15 minutes trying to figure out what the heck they were going to do before they began shooting. So you understand, there was no urgency. They certainly could have taken a position of cover and concealment, as we're trained to do, if and when they actually saw a gun on the lap of Willie McCoy. Now, they said in articles that the gun was on his lap and the magazine of the gun had been partially removed. That means he can't fire the gun, well, except for just one time. If he were to wake up and start shooting, he can only get off 1 round, conceivably. That's why you take cover and concealment and you give orders from a position of safety. They didn't do that. And so because of the Willie McCoy shooting and a lot of other stuff that's going on in Vallejo, NBC did an investigation, and they found out that there are, on this department, 103 police officers. There were 200 uses of force, and those 200 uses of force included the same 14 officers over and over and over. Let's take a look at the video regarding the investigation.
We examined files at courthouses and online, and public use of force records from Vallejo's police department itself. We found a pattern of recurring use of force among specific officers. Out of nearly 200 use of force cases, 14 individual officers' names kept coming up again and again. At least one of those officers was named in nearly every use of force report or lawsuit.
Now, while these stats and numbers are, nice to know, there are real people associated with those numbers. And I want you to meet a young man who was arrested unnecessarily. And listen, when police officers wind up putting their hands on you, they got to take you to jail for something, understanding that at the end of the day, it'll be a DA reject, the case will be thrown out, but you'll already have been inconvenienced. You will have spent, here in LA, if we do it on a Friday and you don't go to court till Monday, 72 hours in jail, right? And then, of course, there's the matter of now, while you haven't been convicted of anything, you now have a criminal record. And really, there need to be laws, something you guys can work on in your own individual communities with your legislators, to have police officers remove your name from the system when they arrest you on something that's bogus, when the charges are dropped because there's insufficient evidence. You should not have a criminal record, but this young man does. And let's see what happened.
Nicholas Pitts, a musician and security guard, had just stepped out of his house to throw out his baby's diapers.
I hear
When he was confronted by Vallejo police officers. According to the police report, the officers approached Pitts because he was jaywalking.
Freeze, get out, freeze, get out. I turn around 1 second, guns drawn at me, and boom, they beat me all the way to the ground. I felt like they was gonna kill me.
Our review of nearly 20 years of use of force cases shows Vallejo and its officers have been named 145 times in state and federal lawsuits. Vallejo paid out more than twice as much money to settle those cases than any other similar-sized city in its insurance pool.
When there are so many settlements and payments that are substantial, that reflects agreement by the experts that there have been mistakes made.
Remember, we're talking about 14 officers that are wreaking all sorts of havoc. I want to introduce you to one of those officers. He's a former now because, well, they said he was let go. He left last year, and I don't know what that means other than to assume that because of all the uses of force and because of the 3 fatal shootings that he had been involved in, while they don't admit any wrongdoing, they allowed him probably to have the gift of resignation rather than fire him for unnecessary deadly force. They let him resign. And of course, here in California, being one of about 5 states that doesn't remove your certification from post, police officer standards and training, he can now get a job somewhere else. I want to introduce you to former officer Sean Kinney. You need to know his name and you need to know his face.
Department's record of use of force troubles him.
Not acceptable, it's not normal, and it's not explained by staffing.
In all, 19 people were killed in these incidents. Others were beaten or choked by police, suffering collapsed lungs and fractured bones. We reviewed 182 different legal records, police reports, and lawsuits involving Vallejo police officers, and we found 59 legal cases in which individual Vallejo police officers were named. And the names of 14 of those officers came up again and again and again in a department of about 100 officers. In fact, out of the 59 cases, 57 of them include at least one of those 14 names. The number of incidents naming each of those officers ranged from 3 at the bottom of the list to 9 different incidents at the top of the list for Officer Sean Kinney.
Why does your name, Sean Kinney's name, come up so often? Yeah, a lot of exposure in a very condensed time frame. I mean, I worked a very bad part of town for most of my career. I was part of high-risk units.
Some people say Sean Kinney was a bad cop. Were you a bad cop?
No. I'd argue anyone to sit there and work with me for a while, look at my work ethic, look at my work productivity.
Kenny, who left Vallejo PD last year, says he worked aggressively to get criminals off the street, but he says his peaceful outcomes far outnumbered the violent ones. You were involved in 3 fatal shootings.
Yes.
What's it like to kill somebody?
Terrible. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable whatsoever. If I could take every single one of my shootings back, I would. I absolutely would.
Well, let me put it to you simply. Did you, in your mind, ever misuse force as a police officer?
No, absolutely not.
There's some.
Let me decipher the code talk for you, because first of all, you don't see this officer express any empathy, any compassion, or any relatability to those 3 families whose loved one he killed. He says that shootings aren't fun. Of course they're not fun. He says that, he felt terrible and that if he could take them all back, he would. Well, if you were shooting in the immediate defense of your life or the life of another, saving the life of another, then you wouldn't have any regret or any remorse, right? There would be no reason to take it back because it was lawful, just, and necessary. I don't believe that to be the case. I don't know the statistics or the incidents that he was involved in where there was a loss of life, but what I do know is white boys like Sean Kinney want to work busy divisions. I work busy divisions. I heard them talk about wanting to be in the South End and South Central. I worked high risk units. Operation South Bureau crash doesn't get any higher risk than that in the 80s and the 90s when gangs were prolific. And guess what? In my 20 years, I never shot anybody. So, to minimize and mitigate the use of deadly force when it's not necessary by saying you were working in a high risk area that was bad. He says he was aggressive. We know that. I'm believing Officer Kinney is who he says he is, and I want you to know who he is and what he looks like, because you may find him somewhere working on another police department. These things are allowed to continue and fester because why? The people at the top, corruption, misconduct, minimization, devaluing black lives starts at the top. And in this case, in the city of Vallejo, it starts with the city manager. And understand that every police chief serves at the pleasure of a mayor or a city manager, both of whom are elected officials. Let's listen to the city manager try to excuse away deadly use of force when it's not necessary in his town.
It's my job to improve what's going on in the city.
Vallejo City Manager Greg Nyoff says the buck ultimately stops with him. Are your citizens scared of their own police officers? Are they?
Well, I think there are some. So I go to neighborhood meetings. I don't hear that from a big section of the city. And, that's the last thing I would ever want to hear, is that my community is afraid of my police department.
There need to be mechanisms in place to deal with officers who aren't meant to be officers.
You cannot afford to have someone who shouldn't be a police officer be a police officer. If you have that person on your department, it absolutely needs to be dealt with, because you're talking about human life.
You heard the code talk, right? Only small numbers of people are complaining, black people, so why would he do anything different about the deadly force that's occurring? City managers are elected officials. That's all the time that I have for now, family. Be good, be safe, and don't forget to subscribe to Sgt Dorsey Speaks YouTube channel, as well as my podcast, Sgt Dorsey Speaks, on the podcast platform of your choice. Be good, be safe.